Donald Trump made major gains with union households from 2020 to 2024 and made courting unions like the Teamsters a feature of his campaign. Now, incoming Indiana Republican Senator Jim Banks, a vocal Trump supporter, says the GOP agenda should focus on doing right by workers, saying, quote, "I won't support policies that fail to center working American families." Republican Congressman Senator-elect Jim Banks joins me now. Senator-elect, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Really appreciate your time.
Good to be with you.
Has your party fallen short in catering to the needs of workers?
Well, I would say so in the past. Go back to 2017. I was a brand new congressman in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump was just elected. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was historic and good for this country, but the old school Republican Party focused on corporate tax cuts. The new Republican Party, the party of Donald Trump, is going to focus more on those tax cuts for working families, for small businesses, and pass-throughs. So when we start the new Congress and we focus on making the Trump tax cuts permanent, we're talking about tax cuts on families and small businesses. That's what makes this a new and better Republican Party than the party of the past.
But doesn't the president-elect, he's been saying they should cut corporate taxes even further?
I'm for tax cuts across the board, but when we talk about making tax cuts permanent, let's make the tax cuts on working families our top priority. I want to make all of the tax cuts permanent because they were good for this country. They created the best economy in my lifetime. But the priority has to be on working class families, families like my family. I'm the son of a factory worker and a nursing home cook. I grew up in a trailer park in a small town in Indiana. And like most Hoosier families, we know that those tax cuts that are about to expire on working class families, they need to be made permanent. That's the priority of the new Republican Party, what I'm fighting for in the United States Senate, and why I released this memo this week that states exactly that has to be the priority. The promise that we made to the American people that gave Donald Trump a mandate and winning the popular vote is to focus on the working class.
So, Mr. Banks, there's a debate within your party about how to sequence the agenda. In fact, this is actually very significant because, as we know, when new majorities come in, they try to pass a lot of things, and oftentimes they struggle to pass their agenda. Are you saying that your party should make that the first focus, the extending the Trump-era tax cuts and push those other issues like border security and energy production to the side?
I don't care as much about the sequence. I mean, making sure that these tax cuts on working class families don't expire and all of a sudden working families get hit with a big tax increase because we didn't do our job would be devastating, not just for our party, but for our country. The easy win, I think, though, is what Stephen Miller and Leader Thune and other Republicans are crafting in the first package that would focus on securing the border, which, by the way, is important to union workers and working class families to save their jobs, and also to focus on energy independence that will make sure that this economy keeps growing and America controls its own destiny. So those early priorities in that first bucket in the reconciliation package are important to working class families as well. But Manu, the biggest story out of Washington, D.C. this week wasn't about Republicans. It's about Democrats who have completely abandoned the working class. You had Leader Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House, who traded a deal away to save union jobs from China in outbound investments in the defense bill because the Democrats were so mad about Republicans stopping funding at the Department of Defense for transgender surgeries. So that's the priority for the Democrat Party. The priority for Republicans is to focus on this new coalition that Donald Trump built for our party, working class union voters, blue collar voters around this country that voted for Donald Trump and Republicans in a big way. This is a new Republican Party, and that's who we're fighting for.
As you talk about the GOP pushing for the working class, Donald Trump is actually staffing his administration with billionaires and CEOs. I mean, by our count, Trump has appointed more than a dozen of the ultra-rich to the top positions in his administration. So, I mean, isn't this precisely what you're warning about, looking out of step with those workers?
Look, this is about getting stuff done. And the Senate has to back up Donald Trump, confirm these nominees, the cabinet that he's picking, all of these individuals that he's choosing to help shake up Washington, whether it's Pete Hegseth getting the military focused on lethality instead of all the woke political causes of the Biden era, or Tom Homan, the border czar, with over 30 years of experience as a Border Patrol agent to secure the border and put American workers' jobs first and to save our jobs, stop drugs and crime from coming into this country. So the Trump agenda is the same this time as it was the last time, the America First agenda. When it comes to tariffs on Chinese steel that saves steel jobs in my country, I don't care how much the cabinet officials are worth. If they could save our working class jobs in this country, that's who I want on the job for Donald Trump's cabinet.
Yeah, that was my question: how much they are worth, and you said you don't care how much they're worth about what they do. But I do want to ask you about one of the nominees who are expected to come to Capitol Hill next week. That's RFK Jr. He'll be on Capitol Hill meeting with GOP senators. There's actually new reporting in the New York Times today that says that one of his top aides, who has a key role in hiring staff for Trump's Health and Human Services Department, worked to get the polio vaccine banned as recently as 2 years ago. And obviously, we know that RFK Jr. has had lots of vaccine skepticism, has falsely said that vaccines are linked to autism. But there's also other concerns as well. Some of the agricultural industry are concerned about his views on farming. You represent an ag state. When you look at this, does any of that bother you?
RFK is obviously a unique and diverse choice, a longtime, lifelong Democrat, one of the major figures in the Kennedy family. Obviously, he has a lot of views that Donald Trump appreciates and supports. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump is the president in the White House, and RFK is going to work for him. And whether it's putting American agriculture first or putting our kids first, this country is ready for a big debate about vaccines and a lot of these issues related to making America healthy again. I support RFK 110% to be the new secretary because I think he brings a lot to the job that's unique. He's going to shake up these departments. But Donald Trump's in charge. He's going to be he's the guy in the White House that's going to be in charge, and RFK is going to report to him. So I have a lot of confidence and comfort in him being the new secretary because I know who's in charge at the end of the day.
One thing that Trump said in an interview published with Time magazine yesterday, that one of his first acts in office will be to pardon those accused or convicted of storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021. You have said in the past that peaceful protesters had a right to be there, but back in 2022, you said this about those prosecuted for crimes on January 6th.
There were people, on the other hand, who broke into the Capitol, who were violent, who attacked Capitol police officers, and they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The FBI has arrested hundreds of them, as they should, and they should be held to a very high standard in the court of law.
So, given what you said about violent protesters being prosecuted, would you be okay if Trump issued a blanket pardon on the January 6th rioters?
Yeah, Manu, I've never heard President Trump talk about offering a blanket pardon to those who were violent or who did things on January 6th of a violent nature against Capitol police officers or damage the United States Capitol. I think President Trump is talking about those who were there that day, who were there showing their support for him. Not those who committed violent acts.
So you would oppose that? You would oppose that?
The notion that I don't know that I've never heard him talk about pardoning those people. But there are a lot of people who were innocent that day, who were there, who were arrested for different reasons. Some of them still in jail to this point. We have the very first woman who was arrested and convicted in the country was a grandma from Indiana, and she just happened to be there that day, and like so many others, was ushered into the Capitol. And as you know, I was appointed to be the ranking member on the January 6th
But
committee.
Mr. Banks, just to be clear, there's a limit on how far Donald Trump should go. You think there should be a limit on who he decides to pardon that day?
Let's wait and see what this pardon looks like. But Donald Trump has never talked about pardoning someone who committed a violent crime on January 6th. That's not who he's talking about. We all know there are hundreds of people who were arrested that day who didn't cause violence or who didn't destroy property at the United States Capitol, who shouldn't have been arrested. And I think that's who Donald Trump is talking about pardoning.
All right, Senator-elect Jim Banks, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, sharing your views. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.